Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Mark and I thank you so much for coming by today. How honest are you when it comes to your work? Whether you're a musician, painter, writer, or someone who enjoys all kinds of creativity, are you the type of person who thinks everything you do looks great? Or do you find yourself looking at your work thinking, it's just okay? If you're the type that thinks everything looks great, then perhaps you're not being completely honest in your assessment of your work. Having other people look at it to provide honest feedback may reveal that your work isn't as great as you thought, especially if they point out areas that need attention. And if you're the type that says it's just okay, then showing other people your work can be a valuable way to validate your work, as well as provide feedback as to why it's better than you thought it was, or to highlight those areas that need attention and which may be the reason you're thinking the work is just okay in the first place. For all creative types in any field, it's always good to get feedback from other people, but it's hard to rely on other people, especially if they aren't being completely honest with us. If you post your work online, people will often say, "Wow, that's amazing," or "You are so talented," and then move along to another post. And that's normal. It's how social media works for most casual users. But just imagine if someone actually said, "I really like your portrait, but those eyes are really way off. You need to fix the eyes." If we're being honest with ourselves, we'll look at their comment and really try to see what they're saying. Are the eyes really off? Most times, when someone is bold enough to point something out in our work, it's like letting the sun shine into a dark room and we can see the flaw for the very first time. Other times, it's like exposing a blemish that we simply thought no one would notice or that we may not have seen but instinctively knew was there. I find it far easier to be honest with other people than myself sometimes. And a good example of this can be found in an older video of mine called Old Artist versus Young Artist, where I talked about my perspectives as an older artist compared to when I was young. But in the video, I was illustrating some chubby cherubs. Here you can see the original drawing where I actually made a mistake. One of the wings was off, and though I knew something was off while I was creating it, I was already committed to finishing the drawing thinking it wasn't a big deal. Of course, I wasn't being honest with myself. After I posted the video, a viewer commented right away about the wonky wing, which suddenly became a glaring mistake in my eyes. So, as I would do with any illustration, I went back in and I fixed it. It's very common in most creative fields to create work, get feedback, find areas that need to be changed or fixed, and then go back and make them right. But when it comes to our own work, it can be more difficult to see those areas that need attention, especially when our eyes are the only eyes that see it. That's why it's always good to get honest, constructive criticism from other people whenever possible. When we post online, instead of just showcasing our work, perhaps we should be asking questions of the people looking at it, saying, "Hey, I have a new piece and I'd really appreciate some helpful feedback," and maybe highlighting an area that we had challenges with, like contrast, anatomy, or perspective, would help motivate people to respond. Like I said though, it can sometimes be hard to be completely honest with ourselves about our own work. And that's what I wanted to discuss today. Some ways to communicate with ourselves, about ourselves, and maybe help improve what we do and how we do it. Let's talk about this and more right after this coffee break. Like I mentioned, looking at our work and learning to see our strengths and weaknesses can be like casting a light into a dark room. But often, if the light isn't bright enough to light up the whole room, we trust ourselves to know where everything is and what everything looks like. And with our work, sometimes trusting ourselves to know where everything is and what everything should look like can leave gaps in the information that we're trying to communicate. And that's why being honest with ourselves and admitting that we don't always know where things are and what they look like can be a prominent step in improving our work, like adding a second or stronger light to the room to reveal more information. Of the ways that I can think of to be more honest with ourselves or aware of our work overall starts with number 1, talking with yourself to hear what you want to know. Communication is how we connect with the world around us, and creating an inner dialogue is how we communicate with ourselves. In looking at our work, there are questions we can ask to get more information, to challenge our complacency, or to move forward more confidently. Are the values in my landscape painting reading properly? Am I jumping around too much in the short story that I'm writing? Or is the tempo of the new song I'm working on too slow? The more honest we can be with our inner dialogue and talking to ourselves, always keeping positive and caring, then the more easily we can address those questions and the more excited we will be to resolve them, as well as knowing we're being honest with our work and with ourselves. Number 2, pulling the weeds. We're all born with a garden to maintain. Some folks maintain their gardens to be beautiful and bountiful, while others maintain their gardens to be simple and plain. Some put almost no effort or care into maintaining their gardens, and still some others just ignore their gardens altogether or are completely unaware that they even have a garden that they were born with. Now, the point of this garden analogy is that it takes time, patience, motivation, nurturing, and love to keep a garden well maintained. Fear, regret, and guilt are the weeds that can take over our garden and consume valuable, nourishing resources to destroy the beauty that is hidden away. Being honest with ourselves and facing our fears and regrets, we can learn to pull those weeds one at a time and eventually free ourselves of the binds that they have over us to let our garden flourish and grow. And yes, we may need help pulling those weeds, but looking at them with an honest heart is the first step in clearing them away. Number 3, embracing your role. Once upon a time, an old farmer dreamed of becoming a famous ballerina. The old farmer practiced dancing in the living room and watched all the best YouTube videos to learn the right steps and moves. But early the next day, the old farmer still had to get up, milk the cows, gather crops, and tend to the daily chores of the farm to help support their family. The old farmer spent a lifetime farming, and while the dream of being a famous ballerina was a strong and passionate dream, it just wasn't realistic. The farmer's role was to be a farmer. They weren't being fully honest with themselves in thinking that watching videos and practicing in the living room were going to take them to the level that they dreamed of. It takes years of practice with professional instruction, critique, direction, and feedback set in an environment that promotes a person's success in the field of dance, or in any field for that matter. If that farmer really wanted to be a famous ballerina, then they would need to change many things in order to pursue that dream. Seeing the role we are in, like being a waiter or waitress, and the role we want to be in, like an actor or actress, means taking severe actions toward that role. And the same applies to learning how to paint with oils, write historical fiction, or to become a famous ballerina. Number 4, time keeps on ticking. My heart is convinced that I'm still a very young man, while my brain tries to convince me that I'm a very old man. But still, my gut tells me to stop thinking about my age and get busy, because there may not be time to do it tomorrow. Thinking that we have all the time in the world to do something is to live by a fool's timepiece. It is so important to be as honest as we can with ourselves when we procrastinate. For many creatives, being distracted and losing track of time is a constant challenge. I know because it happens to me all the time. But being aware that every second in life we waste is a second we cannot get back can help us start on the track of using our time more wisely. And while that may be the perspective of someone older, it's invaluable advice to someone who is younger, even though it's difficult for someone younger to embrace the passing of time. Pink Floyd once sang that the memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. I would expand on that by adding that the regrets of a man in his old age are the deeds undone in his prime, and that can apply to anyone. Looking back over the course of my own life, I shake my head at the countless hours I spent reading other people's books, watching other people's movies, and listening to other people's music. Hours I will never get back, and time I can simply never put into creating my own work again. That time has passed. So ask yourself this: what frivolous things are keeping you from being more productive or creative in your own life? Netflix, video games, social media, YouTube? What will it take for you to write that book? For you to learn how to use those tools, organize that space, or even just send that letter or email that you've been wanting to send? Number 5, Stick with what you know. When I was 18 years old, I had my first piece published. It was an airbrush illustration done with ink and colored pencil. Now back then, Photoshop didn't exist, so being an airbrush illustrator was fairly uncommon. And once publishers found out about my airbrush work, they called for a variety of projects, like advertising, editorial illustration, and photo retouching. Except I had no idea how to do professional photo retouching. But I was aggressive and I never said no to a job, so I took on those retouching projects. At first, it was awful. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what kind of paint to use, what airbrush, compressor, nothing. I could create my own work just fine, but this was something that was beyond my skill level. So, I bought some books, invested in an expensive airbrush and compressor, and I began to teach myself how to do photo retouching. Soon, I was removing crow's feet from corporate headshots, stray hairs and blemishes, and adding highlights to noses and eyeballs. I loved it, and I was having a blast. But then I got a call from one of the biggest image editing houses in Boston. They had a major restoration project for a prestigious hotel and they needed it quick. It was 2 poster-sized photos from the 1920s and they were cracked and yellowing and needed to be completely repaired. I took the job without hesitating, and that was my mistake. Instead of sticking to what I knew, I decided to venture into work that was way beyond my abilities. I wasn't being honest with myself, and it got me into trouble. I requested 2 copies of each poster, one to practice on and one for final work. I set up 30 cups with a range of paints all matching all the different values from yellow to gray in the photographs. I wasn't used to this new airbrush or the new compressor, and suddenly all kinds of problems started happening. My paints were drying too quickly in the airbrush, the compressor began spitting water, and I had to rearrange my entire workspace to accommodate these larger sizes. I ruined the 2 practice photos, and after missing my deadline by a week, I barely finished the 2 final photos to mediocre satisfaction for both me and the client. And that's when I realized I was being dishonest with myself and needed to scale back, learn to say no to projects that were beyond my abilities, and to stick to what I know, to acknowledge what I can't do, and move on to what I can. Number 6, good times, bad times. Getting a new job? Well, that's good times. Going in for unexpected surgery? That's bad times. Finding money in your pocket? Good times. Dropping your phone in the toilet? Bad times. Everyone experiences good things just as often as we experience bad things. And of course, they range from small and minor to major and devastating. Honestly assessing the weight of how good something is or how bad something is can be a good way to keep from lingering on it too long. In creating our artwork, it's important to measure the successes in a piece just as much as the failures as well, so that even if a painting or drawing didn't come out the way we expected and we see it as a failure and a waste of time, we can also see it as a success in that we were able to spend that time creating the work itself, to be able to access our creative spirit and to experience failure in order to learn from it. And arguably, that may be the most important lesson for any creative person. So the next time you unexpectedly find $20 in your pocket, just remember that an unexpected bill for $40 is usually following right behind it. Number 7, breaking the chains. Comfort is the chain that keeps us tethered to our routines. It's very hard to be honest with ourselves while we're sitting safely in our comfort zone. No risks, no challenges, and in turn, no growth. Breaking the chains of security and comfort means stepping out and trying new things, to explore all that space that exists outside our comfort zone. And in doing so, it may make us nervous, anxious, or trepidatious about what we may find. But as I explained to my son when he joined the United States military, when we break the chains of comfort and familiarity, we become afraid. And that fear is the indicator that we are about to grow, change as a person, and gain invaluable experience. And that can be said for starting a new job, starting at a new school, or even just working in a medium that's outside with what we're familiar with and outside our comfort zone. Number 8, looking beyond the mirror on the wall. Looking at our reflection in a mirror, we see exactly what we want to see. We learn to stop seeing consistent flaws and only recognize those that stand out, like blemishes or stray hairs. Our vision often floats between beauty that we perceive and the flaws that we overlook, and we sometimes become narcissists, transfixed with our own appearance. But if we can break away from gazing at ourselves, we can realize that everything in the mirror is nothing more than a reflection of what lies behind us. And looking beyond the mirror on the wall means being able to leverage the information of what is behind us and applying it to the unknown information that lies ahead of us. It means seeing a larger scope of our skills, our abilities, and our goals, and gain a much broader perspective of the world around us. Breaking away from seeing only the things we want by being completely honest with ourselves. It can be scary, humbling, and even sublime when we think of how we fit into the larger scheme of the world. But when we do, we can find that influence and motivation come from all around us, and that eventually we can begin to influence and motivate those around us as well. It's that honesty that can free us from a limited view and to see a larger picture on a much grander scale. Number 9, shape up or ship out. Someone with a weight challenge says there's no point in dieting because they're already overweight. An older person says there's no point in getting a new computer because they'll never be able to figure it out. And a sad person says there's no way to cheer up because there's nothing to be happy about. We should all know at this point that when we're being honest with ourselves, there are almost always ways to overcome the challenges in our lives. I'd like to lose weight just to feel better, but I keep saying that I don't have the time. In my spare time, I draw, I play music, I make videos, and do a dozen things other than losing weight. My mom avoided the internet for years because it was too confusing for her. She said she was too old and would never be able to learn how to use it. Then my dad bought her an iPad for her birthday, and she took a class at the Apple Store. Now she not only uses the internet, she FaceTimes, goes on Facebook, texts her grandchildren, and plays lots of games. It's so easy to convince ourselves that things aren't true because we're not ready to be honest with ourselves about the work that's needed to put in to move forward with our goals. If we could be 100% honest with ourselves, we would know that we don't have to run a marathon to feel good. We can take a short walk or go for a light jog to feel good too. It all starts with small steps to move forward and toward our goals, yet over time, the payoff is huge. There are exercises we can do at home to get our bodies in better shape. There are activities and hobbies we can do to keep our minds sharp. And there are ways to meditate to help keep our spirit relaxed. And for more serious cases, we can always reach out to professionals for help. It all starts with being honest with ourselves. Number 10, honesty is not always the best policy. When we're being honest with ourselves, we not only reveal our strengths, but we reveal our deficiencies as well. And realizing our shortcomings can actually redirect us from a path of frustration and fruitless efforts and align us to a more fulfilling journey of creative success. That said, it's possible to be too honest with ourselves, to the point where we can become harsh and brutal critics of our work, habits, and lifestyles. If we hold ourselves accountable for not succeeding, for not being perfect, or for not meeting our own expectations, we can experience a tolerance effect, where motivation and self-esteem can start to wither away more and more over time, to the point where we lose interest, motivation, and desire in the work that we once thoroughly enjoyed. For some people, jumping right into a project and seeing it through from start to finish is how they prefer to work, despite mistakes or adjustments as they go. For others, just making one wrong mark on the paper can result in complete failure and tearing out a whole page to start all over again. I saw this time and time again with many high school students. At some point, they didn't learn to properly plan out their intentions, lay out a drawing, or how to adapt to the dozens of things that can affect a drawing. Instead of reacting in a rational, constructive way, even to something as simple as making a wrong mark on their paper, they would react emotionally with frustration and anger and the impulse to abandon their efforts and just start all over again, wasting paper, materials, and especially time. It's not unlike a writer getting frustrated when they can't find the right flow of their words, or a musician trying to find the right lyric for a melody. Often, the harder we try to figure something out, the further away we get from where we want to be. Many high school students have a vision in their mind of how their work should look, but when it doesn't turn out the way they want it to because their skills or ideas may be undeveloped, then it results in that frustration. Instead of being honest with ourselves and our skills and abilities, we struggle with expectations and end up criticizing ourselves for not meeting them. However, in being honest about our skills and abilities, we can identify the successful points in our work, from the composition, color choices, or that we even took the time to create in the first place, and avoid beating ourselves up over what we can't control. One of the best things about being honest with ourselves is that we can extend what we already have in place and put it forward as a future goal. Let me explain. For example, saying, "I'm not good with watercolors" is a pretty final statement, which oddly enough isn't honest. If we extend what we have in place, like not being good with watercolors, and use a word like yet, we can then put it forward as a future goal and say, "I'm not good with watercolors yet," which is a far more honest saying than trying to convince ourselves that we'll never be good at watercolors. It simply removes the pressure of expectation and adds the option to improve at our own convenience. If we say a statement like, "I'll never learn to draw trees," then again, we put a finality on what we can achieve. However, adding phrases like "right now" or "at the moment" can eliminate that finality and allow us the freedom to pursue that goal in the future. So saying, "I'll never learn to draw trees right now," or "I'll never learn to draw trees at the moment" is exactly like saying, "I'll never learn to draw trees until I'm ready to practice drawing them over and over." And with that freedom, we can then approach drawing trees with less pressure and less expectation on ourselves. Mark Twain once said, "If you tell the truth, you never have to remember anything." Because when it comes to communication, being honest helps convey accurate information without twisting it up with redirected mistruths. Our bodies keep us aware, safe, healthy, and balanced through honest communication from our heart, mind, and in our gut. Knowing when something isn't working the way it should and knowing when to react to that information is vital to maintaining ourselves. And that applies to our creative work as well as our mind, body, and spirit. They're all connected, much like a home is connected with light, heat, and clean air. Well, I hope this discussion was enjoyable for you and maybe helpful in some way. Thank you again for spending your time watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, and I'd love to bring you more content like this in the future. So go look in the mirror and see the honesty in your own reflection. Of course, if you expect to see perfection, you may be disappointed, because what you'll see is a unique beauty that is all your own and so worth celebrating every day. Thank you again for your time. Have a great day, and God bless.